Two more issues that are going to be the topics today. One is the discussion of whether the Westlake superintendent should double dip. We will discuss that, and you can make up your own minds whether that makes sense or not. There are pros and cons to double dipping, and we will cover those today. There will be a public hearing on April 13th at the board meeting where they will discuss this. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, please attend that meeting. I don't have the location right now. They move around a little bit. Maybe Ross, you know, is it?
It's probably the administration building.
So it's
yeah, but you're right. They changed it at the last minute.
So keep your eyes out on that. They do post it on the Board of Elections site. The other issue we're going to discuss today is PI levy. We will discuss what a PI levy is, how it is different than an operating levy. And there are some public discussions on the PI levy. I've got some of these sheets in back you can look to for information on that. But there are 3 meetings coming up. On April 16th at Bassett Elementary, there's a meeting to discuss it. On April 20th, Porter Public Library, they're going to discuss it. On April 28th at Holly Lane, they're going to discuss the PI levy. So those are your opportunities to hear the district rationale for the levies. I want to recommend that if you want information about the financial situation of the district, one resource is a website called Educate Westlake. It's a pretty good resource. They take the data and they'll put it in graphical format so you can see information about the district's finances. So visit Educate Westlake if you get a chance to get information about that. There are also some other sites. We'll post links on a Westlake Republican website. There's a citizens organization that supports the levy. We'll put links to that in there. And the board also has some information in the district. So we'll put links to all of that. So if you visit our website, you'll be able to see that information. All right, that's it for, those are the important issues of the year. So this is an important year in Westlake for the educational system. We've got 2 speakers, and we're going to discuss the PI levy and the double dipping. Our first speaker is Greg Lawson. He's with the Buckeye Institute. He's got a long history of grassroots organizing, and he asked me not to read his entire bio. So we're going to put him first, and he's going to describe both the PI levy, what it is, and he's going to describe double dipping, what it is, the pros and cons. Please hold your questions to the end. We're going to have 2 speakers, and then we're going to have ample time for Q&A, and both speakers will participate in that Q&A. So because each of them are going to be discussing pertinent topics, it makes sense to hold off until the end, and maybe some of your questions will be answered during the presentation. So let's welcome Greg.
Hello there. Glad to be up here. It's always kind of nice to get up to this half of this day. We're based in Columbus, the Buckeye Institute. How many of you, first off, how many folks have heard about the Buckeye Institute? Okay, a handful of you. I will just do the shameless plug first, which is I do have a sign-up sheet in the very back of the room with our logo on it. And it's kind of funny, we have a blue Ohio. I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing all the way around, but at any rate, it's a sign-up. It's for everything, information, news releases, reports we do. We're a free market think tank. I think one of the simplest ways to explain what we are is we're sort of like a heritage foundation, but more or less focused on state policy. Unfortunately, we're increasingly seeing how federal policy plays an extremely large role in state policy now in terms of federal dollars that flow into the state and strings attached that obviously impact our policies. But we look at all kinds of things: healthcare policy, tax policy, education policy, and our general proposition is that freedom works, that liberty and being able to let the free market operate is the right way to building prosperity in the state of Ohio. So lower taxes, limited regulations, things of that nature. And Ohio is a very interesting state because we have a lot of issues going on at the state level. We also have a lot of local governmental issues. Lots of local government, lots of school districts, over 600 here in the state. So we spent a lot of time looking at that. We're well known for, we were one of the first groups in the state to put public salaries on a database that's available on our website, buckeyeinstitute.org. We have both state employees and also teachers and school district employees. It's also available on our website. A number of other organizations have done that now. The Treasurer of the State, Josh Mandel, has done that for a while as well, and it's sort of expanding on transparency, which is something we think is very important because that gets us to tax policy. From our views, you want to understand how the governments are spending money. That is the first step to understanding what you might be able to do in terms of constraining costs and things like that, which is really where we kind of pull back into this conversation, which is we have a permanent permanent improvement levy is basically what you have coming up before you, and it's I believe it's a 1 mil one. Am I correct on that? Is it 1 mil? Okay. And basically what it is this is not an operating levy. Now, an operating levy usually is what you think of when you are dealing with the ongoing costs of the school district, huge salaries, and all of the things that are involved with personnel and the day-to-day management of the school district. That's really what the operations are. This one is the capital. It's dealing with buildings, it's dealing with maintenance, it's dealing with the school buses and things like that. If you need new school buses, or if you need to do certain types of maintenance and things like that, that's what this is really dedicated to. A lot of times districts will pass these because they will want to say, we need this to go to capital. We need this to be used for these things. They're going to say that it's very transparent. You can't use dollars that are in this type of levy to essentially pay for salaries. And that's absolutely true. None of the dollars that would theoretically be raised if this levy were to be successful will go directly to salaries. Now, it differs in different districts in terms of whether or not that frees up dollars that can then be spent on salaries and other things, or basically operations. My understanding is that at this district, you have some general revenues, which is your general property. Most it's the combination of what the state brings in with your foundation formula, as well as your property taxes that are going towards current operational. There's a certain amount that's already going to these capital costs out of what is usually the operations budget. So when you raise this levy, some of that will be able to supplant general revenues that are currently being spent on capital expenditures. So in a sort of a backdoor or roundabout way, a successful levy here would allow there to be freed up dollars that could then be spent on operations, although it wouldn't be the levy dollars per se that it's doing. It's kind of like how the lottery was developed. The lottery was always going to be the savior for school funding, and those lottery dollars, those lottery profits are only supposed to go to schools, and that's true. That's exactly what the lottery profit fund does, is it goes exclusively to schools, but it didn't necessarily solve all the problems. There's still a vast majority of general revenues that are going in. So that is a very kind of a 30,000-foot view. I don't know the specifics of, are your buildings in the best of shape, where's your buildings at, things like that. That's something that needs to be asked and looked at as part of the questions that should happen in any kind of a levy effort or campaign, is understanding what is the situation of those districts. But another thing I think that people really need to understand is, what is the overall fiscal situation that your district is in? And so one of the things I like to do is sometimes go around to different areas around the state and chat with people and say, well, what is it that you need to be looking at? So you can understand when local officials come to you and ask you for your money here at the local level. I mean, property taxes can be a challenge. Property taxes seem to always be going up. They may be going up a little bit more now because of a variety of decisions that have been made at the state level that has kind of shifted some of the funding equation coming out of Columbus, and it's put a little bit more of a onus on local taxpayers. So you want to be sure that you're getting the most bang for the buck at the local level. And it's always evident that schools, almost invariably, from big school districts that are major urban districts with tens of thousands of students, to districts such as Westlake, which I think is a little under, I think the current enrollment is slightly under 4,000, but it's historically right around 4,000 or so. And of course there are some school districts in the state that are even smaller. But it's personnel. The personnel costs are the main issues and the main drivers of most budgets that school districts face. And I'm not going to steal Dave's here's thunder on talking a little bit about the experiences that he had as a school board member dealing with some of these issues. But when you need to understand, you're going to have this improvement levy that's going to free up some dollars that probably will go to your operations and will go towards paying for the salaries of teachers, the benefits of teachers, and then how those are decided is going to be something that you'll probably want to look at as time goes on, because you're going to get, I think you've shot, I think 2 of them have now failed in a row, is that right?
Right.
And so this is going to deal with one thing. It's going to free up a little bit of money that will go into operations probably on the backside, but that's probably not going to be enough. You will get another operations levy probably at some point, and that's when you need to start looking at what are your salaries, what are your comparisons to other similar districts, what are your healthcare benefits. There's a number of different data points here. Quite frankly, you've got a lot of good information contained apparently in this packet. I was just perusing as I sat up here, but it's evident that some people have been going to some of the go-to resources. One of the most important ones is through the Ohio Department of Education website. It's called the CUP report. And you can Google it. It's probably easier to try and navigate the ODE website because they changed it a lot. But it's CUPP. It's named after former Senator, now State Representative, Bob Cupp, who also was a former, actually is now, he was a senator. He was out of also Ohio. He was a Supreme Court Justice here at the Ohio Supreme Court. But he is now in the State House. He created a situation where school districts have to submit a whole bevy of different types of data points to the Ohio Department of Education. And they're able to do a lot of cross-pollination of the data and being able to do data points and comparisons. And they're also able to do something which is extremely important, which is look at, from the Ohio Department of Taxation, compare the school district, the people who file taxes within a school district, to other school districts. Sometimes it's difficult to do that because we've got so many school districts, they don't correspond to cities necessarily. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but if you were trying to figure out, well, what does a teacher make in comparison? What is the average teacher salary compared to the average taxpayer income in a particular school district? The CUP report will allow you to look at that. It'll also allow you to look at something which I think is important, or maybe even more important. Sometimes averages can skew things a little bit because of the number of people you have on either the high side of the salary scale or the low side. So we like to look at the median teacher salary, because that one tells you that 50% of teachers are making more than what that number is, and 50% of the teachers are making less than what that number is. And so that gives you a pretty good idea as to kind of what the general distribution of some of these salaries are. So those are some, and it's in the CUP report. It allows you to compare your district to similar districts with similar type of demographic profiles, income profiles. Tries to get it somewhere in the wheelhouse of the size of the district from a geographic standpoint. That's important because if you're a really huge district, you're going to have more transportation costs than if you're a small district, because you got to bus your kids around a larger distance, and so you have more gas, more expenses, and things like that. So I would encourage. I think you pulled most of this up. This page is probably a good chunk of it is from the CUP report, I think, because it looks almost exactly like it. So to me, I think you actually pulled it directly from there, and you'll be able to. The thing you always want to look at is the teachers. You want to look at what are their salaries and where does that compare. It looks like Westlake is definitely higher in terms of the average salary than than similar defined districts by a decent chunk, actually, about 9,000, not quite 9,000, but that's something to consider. It doesn't mean that that's a bad thing inherently, but it's something that allows you to ask questions. And that's what the data all is about, getting information into your fingertips to ask questions. We don't like to necessarily say you should or shouldn't do something, but you need to know why or do all the teachers have master's degrees, for example? That can bump up the cost, because when you look at your collective bargaining agreement, and so let me backtrack for a second here. CUP report, excellent data resource. Second data resource are your 5-year forecasts. You can get that both off of the Ohio Department of Education website, or I think Westlake on the Westlake School District page has this as well, that the treasurer or the chief financial officer puts out. 5-year forecasts are just what they sound like, but they're actually done twice a year, once in May, so there's going to be a new one coming out next month, or will be submitted next month, and if it's not available in May, it will be available in June for you to look at. And then one's done in October. Basically what they do is they look at all the expected revenues, they just project out their different expense categories, and you can see when you're going to be taking in more money or when you're going to be spending more than you're bringing in. And you can see where the trend lines are and what are the major expense categories are. So a 5-year review, 5-year forecast is also important one. I don't think it's as good as the CUP report, quite frankly. It's helpful, but a lot of times the 5-year forecasts have a lot of different assumptions that can be embedded in there. There are some standards in terms of how they're supposed to do forecasting, but it's not unheard of that you may assume that there's going to be a levy, or you may assume there's not going to be a levy at some point in that time period. And whether you assume that or you don't assume that, your forecast is going to have a vastly different outcome in terms of what your money is going to look like. But you can look at that, and it gives you some points of reference to ask questions about where you see, if you see big upswings in personnel services or in basically benefit categories, which is usually the pension, which is the pension obligation, the pension costs that the local jurisdiction has to pay taxpayers are doing towards the pension of every employee in the district. How high is that going? And also health insurance. How much is that spiking, or is it plateauing? These are important things to understand. So those are two extremely important data sets to take a look at when you hear about a levy coming out. The third thing that I think is extremely important is to understand how teachers, what is the salary schedule, how are people compensated, what is the structure of the arrangement that the teachers have with the district, and all of that is within your collective bargaining agreement. All the teachers are going to be, for the most part, subject to a union agreement between whoever the bargaining unit for those teachers is and the school board. The CBA may be on the, I don't know for sure if it's on the Westlake website, it might be, but I know that you're going to get it to a public records request. Your organization, Educate, I think Westlake has a link to it as well on their website, and you can also go to something called the State Employee Relations Board website, colloquially known as SERB. That entity has every single collective bargaining agreement in the state of Ohio between any union representing all schools, all local governments, and the state of Ohio. And so it's hundreds upon hundreds, obviously, actually thousands really of different collective bargaining agreements. You can go and you get a PDF document. These are big things, usually well over 100 pages, but they're extremely important because they'll have the salary schedule in there. And the salary schedule is always going to be based usually upon the years of experience that a teacher has. And you'll see what the entrance salaries are, what they are based upon the number of years that they're there, what they call step increases, which are automatic increases in salary that teachers get. These are always in there. There's certain longevity separate from step increases that can be negotiated in there. You will also see that if somebody gets a master's degree, which that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, it's a debatable thing, but everybody who gets a master's degree, it automatically kicks up the rate, it changes the step increases that teachers get. So you'll want to see what is that salary schedule as well. So there's the basic one, which is more like the bachelor's, and then you've got your master's one as well. So you take a look at all of those things. It also tells you how much they're gonna be paying towards their insurance. Now sometimes, and that's really huge, because how much does the district pay towards the benefits of all of their employees the more burden that's on the employer, the more burden ultimately that's on the taxpayer. So understanding that is critical. Now a lot of times they will couch it in phrases of they'll tell you the dollar amount that the employee has to pay rather than a percentage of their income. So you sometimes have to do some back of the envelope calculations to get percentages and things like that. But as a kind of a rough rule of thumb, I would always like to say that usually, folks in the private sector are usually not only paying 10%. Frequently, teachers and I don't know for sure what the situation here in Westlake is, but a lot of times they're paying like 10% of the premiums for their health insurance. Well, frequently it's up to 25% a lot of times. Sometimes more, sometimes less. It depends on the size of the private sector employer. but it's usually at least double what is one of the more frequent ones that you get within these collective bargaining agreements. So, legitimate questions to ask is, what is the percentage of pension and things like that, or a percentage of health insurance that the district is picking up? Does the district do things, and this will also be in the collective bargaining agreement, does it do, a few of them do it today, but it used to be done a lot, where they would actually pick up the employee pension cost. So basically, the school district pays 14% of every employee's salary in the school district into the one of the several funds for education, the state teachers retirement system or the school employees retirement system. It used to be that, and sometimes this happens more often with administrators now, but they will do pension pickups where they will actually pay, the district pays 14% and then the employee was supposed to pay 10%. They've changed that a little bit in recent years. I think it's going up to about 12%. But you can still negotiate an agreement where the employee share is picked up by the tax-paying authority in addition to the 14% that they have to pay. So those are questions to know. A lot of times that doesn't happen. I'm not sure that that's happening here, but it's a question you want to ask. So those are some of the top lines of the best places to go to get information and some of the questions to ask. I'm going to shift a little bit here to that second point that we were talking about, which is the double dipping question. I've got quite frankly, an op-ed that I did for the Youngstown Vindicator earlier this year. It's on the back table there, along with the Ohio flag on it, the Logan clock. You can take a look at it if you're interested. But here's the issue. Basically, double dipping is kind of what it sounds like. A person, quote unquote, retires, a public employee, they then get full access to their pension, but then they are rehired by a particular public sector employer, and they're able to get a salary in addition to their pension, which frequently can be in upwards of 70% or so of their final salary that they had ended with when they retired. So what usually happens is the entity that is hiring the person back pays a lower salary than they were paying before they retired. So what the government entity or a school district or whoever it is will say is, we're doing two things. One, we're saving money, and two, we're maintaining somebody with a lot of experience who maybe we couldn't find somebody else. That's something you hear a lot about the school district, that we couldn't find somebody who had the experience that we wanted. Usually they pay less, so there is some cost savings usually to the school district itself. However, you got to be kind of careful because sometimes they only pay a little bit less, like $10,000 or something less a year. If you talked about a superintendent who's making probably, I would assume, somewhere over six figures. It varies again by school district, by size, by wealth, and everything else. But they're only doing a $10,000 savings. That's not a lot of savings to the school district, but usually it's more than that. But here's the problem that we see from the Buckeye Institute's perspective. It may be sold as being a tax savings to folks in that district for now, but we have long maintained that the more people that do it, that's taking money out of the pension system and blocking money that's going into the pension system. And so, because they're not going back and putting more money into the pension. So you're taking money out of the pension system across the state, and that is one of the problems you see. You have pension systems that are usually underfunded. And we have 5 state pension systems, all public employees, except for a Cork in Cincinnati where some folks have a separate pension system. And most state
Attention staff, Hank to the front desk, please. Hank to the front desk.
Pay into one of those 5 pension systems. So when you have folks drawing money down and not putting money back into the system, you're lowering that amount, you're lowering the amount of money that's being invested in everything else by the pension system. And so it creates a challenge of what is your long-term liabilities and what is your funding, basically, what is your funding ratio for the pension. STRS, which is the State Teachers Retirement System, has historically been one of the less funded pension systems. They've done some recent reforms, quote unquote, the legislature did a couple of general assemblies ago to tweak how the pensions are calculated and to tweak how much people pay into the pension and some things like that. Basically, you're supposed to be able to pay all your liabilities that you've accrued within a 30-year time period. It's all about what's actuarially sound, but that's what they're supposed to do by statute. Well, you were finding that many times independent, each one of these pension systems weren't necessarily able to do that, which means that there's a massive economic decline, where you have a mass exodus of people and you have to get on the hook and pay all of these pension benefits. You may not be able to pay all of those out without having to increase the taxpayer portion going into the system. In fact, SDRS at one point in time, as recently as 2010, was proposing increasing the contribution from the schools into there because of that. They didn't get the way that didn't happen. That's not on the table right now, but the fact that they were floating that as an idea just before Governor Kasich was elected shows you that they are willing, or in the past, they've been willing to at least countenance the idea of making the taxpayers have to pay more towards the pensions to shore up the system. So when you think about that, think about when somebody's driving it out and not putting money into the system, which is what double dipping does. Is the one person to think it's going to break the pension system? Absolutely not. But because it's a policy, because it's allowed, and it's fully legal to do, this isn't somebody doing something sneaky or anything like that. That's the way the policy is. So I think it's important to say you can't blame somebody for taking advantage of something that the policy is there to do. So if somebody does this, it's eminently reasonable that they would. If I had that opportunity, I would do it. I'm sure probably many folks here would do it if you had the opportunity, but you don't get to do that in the private sector. And that's the challenge, is the fairness and lack thereof, and then what it can mean for the long-term sustainability of the pension systems. That's what makes double dipping such a pernicious issue. But it's also really hard to grapple with because you don't know how many people are really double dipping across the state, so you don't necessarily have a good grip. And you can't it's not a public record. Once somebody retires and gets their pension payout, you can calculate what it would be based upon their salary, but you don't actually have access as a public record to what those pension payouts are. So it's very difficult to ascertain what is the cumulative effect statewide of people doing this. But is it a positive one? Is it a net positive to the pension systems? It can't be a net positive. The only thing that they could possibly say is that it's not that much of a thing. So that's what double dipping is. That's what the policy implications are from the big picture of double dipping. And it's a question that can be asked. Is it fair? Is it right? Does it save enough money? Is it worth it to the district? Those are the kind of questions that I suppose I think are worthy of being asked with respect to it. So I'm going to shut up now because I think I've probably gone over what I meant to. I'm going to I'll turn it over here before and make sure that Dave gets up here and is able to chat a little bit.
Thank you, Greg. We'll have after this, and if you have any particular questions on double dipping or the levy, Greg will be happy to answer those. I would like to make a couple announcements before we get to the next round. I'd like to recognize our candidates, elected officials that have graced us with their presence today. Greg Allison is the new political director for the RPCC.